Okay, this is an educational video about a ganglion cyst, which often accompanies tendinosynovitis of the finger in rock climbers. Typically, ganglion cysts will happen in and around the major pulleys of the finger. So if you're not familiar with the pulleys, the A2 pulley is over the proximal phalanx, the A3 pulley is over the PIP joint, and then the A4 pulley is over the middle phalanx. So there's a lot of mechanical pressure that happens at the tendon and the pulley interface as we're grabbing onto holds and we're opening and closing and twisting. There's just a lot of friction that happens on the undersurface of the tendon up and against the tendon sheath and the pulleys. The example that we have here is quite a large ganglion cyst. And so if we document the major pulleys here, this is demonstrating the A2 pulley, the A4 pulley is here, and then the A3 pulley is right across the joint. So as we flex the joint in more aggressive positions, we put more pressure in the direction away from the bone of the tendon up against the pulleys themselves. Typically what happens with a lot of friction is you can create irritations here where you get a little pocket of fluid that is in and around that location, either at the A2 or the A4, and sometimes it can migrate up into here. Typically pulley cysts or cysts in general are not that dangerous and they're not that risky to load, but they absolutely can be symptomatic to the point where athletes can't do pull-ups, can't do deadlift, can't climb on jugs. These are commonly diagnosed as A2 pulley strains, which they certainly can be in conjunction with a pulley strain. They also can be in conjunction with tendinosynovitis. So if you're experiencing pain on the flexor side of the finger, a lot of times you can feel like a little palpable nodule at the edge of the pulleys. You want to make sure you feel those. You also want to make sure that you don't assume that it's just a pulley injury that you can tape, because a lot of times people will tape these, but if I put tape on this finger here, I'm actually putting more pressure in the direction of the pulley and I'm pinning the cyst against the tendon and the object, which is the tape in this case, and then also a climbing hold. So this visual that I have here is quite a dramatic example where the A2 pulley is here. Make that pin a little larger. A2 pulley is here, and then all of this is fluid. That's a cyst. And so this one did accompany a pulley strain, so that's probably a 50% pulley strain where this part of the pulley is now up on top and there's a pocket of fluid and granulation tissue. This is an example of one that's not just fluid filled because there's all that white stuff in there. This one's the pulley pulled up and there's a lot of an inflammatory response around it. There's another picture that I'll show you of a different example, less dramatic of a pulley cyst, but that's one to start with. So mechanisms here, you get a lot of high local pressure on the flexor tendon sheath. The more aggressive the finger position, the more you move from an open hand, which is very low pressure to the pulleys, to a half crimp, which is, let's call that medium pressure, to high angle crimping, that's very high pressure of the tendon up against the tendon sheath. This commonly happens with pockets, jug climbing, lifting, full crimping. So pocket climbing here, we grab on and we put a lot of pressure here. With jug climbing, we grab on and we put a lot of downward pressure on the tendon sheath. And then with lifting, we also grab onto really heavy objects and then we're putting that pressure away from the joint of the tendon against the tendon sheath, but we're pinning the tendon sheath and the cyst against a physical object. So these micro injuries to the tendon sheath and tears lead to cyst formation. So there's a little bit of tear in the membrane, the tendon sheath, and as a consequence, the fluid from within the tendon sheath kind of migrates slowly outside of the tendon sheath and ends up on the surface of the tendon sheath. So these are not exclusive to climbing. So other types of athletes will get cysts in their fingers, jiu-jitsu athletes, CrossFit athletes, people that are grabbing onto a lot of objects and grabbing and twisting will also present with pulley cysts. Clinical presentation is typically tenderness with pressure. So if you feel like you have a A2 pulley sprain and you push down and you can feel a little nodule on the edge of the pulley, that's likely there's some sort of irritation to the pulley, but there's also a little bit of a fluid collection which would demonstrate that you have a bit of a cystic change. Palpable nodule, these are really easy to detect via ultrasound. So if people schedule an office with me, first line of defense, we're always going to do a diagnostic ultrasound to see the size of the cyst, the location of the cyst, and come up with an actionable plan that will help the swelling and the symptoms go down. Note that when you have a cyst, it's not likely that it's fully going to disappear unless we do an injection to the tendon sheath, or in some cases do an aspiration of the cyst, pulling the fluid out. Most of the time, that's not the case. Most of the time, it is a 8 to 12 week process of really getting the symptoms under control and unloading, reducing the inflammation, reloading, back to normal climbing performance will take a little bit of time, but it's not very common that these will just disappear. For example, I have 3 on 3 different fingers from a lot of years of climbing. If I have a really big training session and I do a lot of board climbing, back-to-back days, rest another day, or go to Joe's Valley where it's very crimpy, mine will get sore. If I look at them on a diagnostic ultrasound, they might look a little bigger and more irritated, but then I know that I have to take some time off. So for me, in general, I don't get to climb that frequently, or my training habits are every couple days. I don't even notice that mine are there. So take that into consideration. Don't expect, if you get these diagnosed via ultrasound, that you get a re-ultrasound, you expect them to go away, because that's actually not that typical. Conservative treatment here, sometimes people will put a lot of mechanical pressure on them and get them to resolve on their own. So gently massaging or aggressively massaging these in some instances will get the swelling to go down. I tend to find that being very unreliable as a way of getting them to go down, and it's quite sore to do it. So I think that making yourself hurt quite a bit to make the pain go down in the short term is not that physiologic of an adaptation, and then I think long term that's not really sustainable or going to do a whole lot, but that's something that people do. Invasive treatments, more puncture and local steroid injections, will help reduce the inflammatory response, and then surgical excision. Getting them removed surgically also is an option. A lot of times when people get them removed surgically, they come back. So these happen on the back side of the wrist as well, and people will smash them with a book back in the day, but then they will grow back. I know multiple people that have had them excised surgically and they return. And that's a consequence of there's no way that we can climb and progress to grades without using these positions where we have to put a lot of high mechanical pressure on the pulleys and the tendon sheath with full and half crimping. So here's another visual of an A2 cyst, which is much smaller. So you can see this one here. That's the cyst right here in the middle. Here's the flexor tendons down here. This is the bone. And then the A2 pulley is all this. So this one also doesn't look like it had definitely not a full rupture, but there's part of the pulley that has pulled up, and then there's a little bit of a fluid collection there. And that really comes from the interface here, just a lot of friction. So when we're grabbing onto a small hold and we're opening, closing, twisting, etc. for long periods of time, that's the primary mechanism by which we get a lot of friction on the undersurface, creating the cystic changes. If we look at it in a cross section, so this is actually if I chop the finger off, and the bone is on the bottom here. So here's the bone. Here's the flexor tendons in the middle. And then here's the pulley over the top. And the pulley is quite large in this case, right? And this one, in this case, has this right here is the granulation tissue. So that's a bit of the actual pulley cyst that we're looking at on this picture here. So it's an increase in height on a diagnostic ultrasound documenting that's the location of the cyst. In this case, if we have an A2 pulley cyst and we're doing a lot of weighted pull-ups, we're doing a lot of calisthenics on rings, we're just grabbing onto a lot of jugs, we're grabbing onto and putting a lot of pressure there, that's something that will certainly not necessarily make the cyst worse. It will make it more symptomatic, but structurally I don't think that's a mechanism that's going to make it worse, but you got to get away from doing those things. So a lot of times when people have a cyst at the pulley, they only think about pulley strain or pulley injuries, and a lot of times the knee-jerk reaction is to tape the joint, either H-tape the joint or tape right over the top of it, but that just adds more local pressure into the cyst that we push back when we do climbing. Another common mistake that people make is they will think that they need to do easy climbing to make sure this goes away, but easy climbing usually has big jugs. So I usually find people need to book a 4 or an 8 week phase rehab plan to get this under control, and we want to take a period of deloading where we get away from the climbing wall and we use other tools, fingerboarding, no-hang tools, etc., and build or maintain tolerance prior to building tolerance and then getting back to normal climbing positions. It's going to take a little bit of time, and it's based on your individual training age, your current strength level, how long you've been dealing with the symptoms. But don't just assume that if you have pain and tenderness there, that this is just a pulley thing that you can tape and get it to go away, because it'll definitely take a little bit more nuance.